My name is Thomas Woltz. I'm a landscape architect working in New York City and Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm the owner and principal of Nelson Bird Woltz Landscape Architects and a member of the board of directors of the Municipal Arts Society of New York. Tonight I'm going to talk a lot about resilience, a lot about how public space can host an urban dialogue, how public space can be welcoming, can be nurturing, can really create a haven for us as human beings to enter a discourse of our humanity within public space. We incorporate a lot of horticulture, a lot of cultural history, quality materials that make the public square, the public forum, in a lasting way that hopefully will continue to host discourse for hundreds of years.
Last September, I had the pleasure of introducing our audience to Vin Cipolla, president of the Municipal Arts Society of New York, and Fred Eisman, its chairman of the board. Since then, to my profound delight, the ties between the Municipal Arts Society and the arts arena have grown closer, leading to the launch tonight of the Arts Arena Municipal Arts Society Paris, New York series on cities. I know the title is long, but each element seemed essential to us and definitely preferable to the acronym of AAMASPNYSC. Tonight, we are all part of the inauguration of a biannual series that will involve a joint spring event in Paris and a fall event at the Municipal Arts Society Summit for New York City in October. Before going any further, and by way of sharing with you what is at the core of this new partnership, I'd like to return to some words I said in introducing Vin Cipolla and Fred Eisman, and that concern a shared set of values. And I asked you in advance to forgive me that this introduction will be a little bit long because this is the launch of a new partnership, and I want to tell you about it in addition to introducing our speaker. From day one, the arts arena has been about more than the arts per se. From the start, we've had a forum for culture and society dedicated to breaking down ghetto walls between the arts and the worlds of business, science, cultural diplomacy, technology, and development, and exploring how the arts can be used for the betterment of the world in which we live. One of our very first events was a joint conference with the Aspen Institute entitled Culture in Conflict, in which its Cultural Diplomacy Forum was launched. We've regularly presented events such as photography and human rights, art, philanthropy, and sustainable development, and activist arts in partnership with UNESCO. In 2012, we organized a month-long festival of contemporary Iranian arts. For 7 years, we've hosted the United Nations Association Film Festival, addressing major social issues through high-quality documentary films. Our policy of holding events that are free and open to the public is our ongoing contribution to a public service based on the arts. These words about the arts arena's work are intended to show you why I'm profoundly moved to announce this partnership with the Municipal Arts Society, an astoundingly dynamic and forward-thinking advocate for intelligent urban design and a model for our shared values and community view of the arts. I'm certain you will see that its work is as relevant to the old world and our beloved Paris as to the new world and New York. The Municipal Arts Society, however, is not new. It was founded by artists in 1893 as a nonprofit to beautify New York City parks and public buildings with murals and sculptures financed by membership dues. Its range of activities has been stunning ever since. In 1962, the city's first major tree planting campaign. In the 1930s, its advocacy for the construction of Rockefeller Center, then an unpopular pro-modernist position. Its groundbreaking land use and preservation laws that have become national models. The Municipal Arts Society has played a critical role in the creation of the New York City Planning Commission, Design Commission, and Landmark Preservation Commission, and served as incubator for such civic organizations as the Public Art Fund, New York Landmarks Conservancy, Historic Districts Council, and the Park Avenue Armory. It has initiated walking architectural tours, played a crucial role in saving Grand Central Terminal and the lights of Times Square, and fought against the demolition of Radio City Music Hall. Its creative thinking brought about the popular Adopt a Monument program. It co-created Tribute in Light, a spectacular public art project now part of the National September 11 Memorial Museum. In 2007, it initiated the groundbreaking public program series, Jane Jacobs and the Future of New York. And in 2010, the first annual Municipal Arts Society Summit for New York City brought together top urban academics and thought leaders to identify the most significant challenges to the city's future. One of them, political theorist Benjamin Barber, who sat on a panel at the 2014 MAS Summit for New York City, is tonight sitting in our audience here for the publication of the French version of his book, If Mayors Ruled the World, Et si les mairies gouvernaient le monde. Very pleased to have him. The MAS Summit is now the city's most important urban design conference. MAS, that's not Marjorie Arendt Sapphire, that's Municipal Arts Society. I've done a lot, but not all this, has also emerged as a leading force promoting the link between historic preservation and energy efficiency. Its manual, Greening New York City's Historic Buildings, helps property owners improve the energy efficiency of small historic buildings without impacting their aesthetic character or incurring large capital outlays. Its Livable Neighborhoods program annually engages civic-minded New Yorkers in all aspects of the city's planning process. In sum, the Municipal Arts Society is at the forefront of New York's most critical campaigns to promote the city's economic vitality, cultural vibrancy, environmental sustainability, and social diversity. MAS is a convener of ideas and an advocate for solutions. But why invite a New York nonprofit to Paris? To begin with, they're the Arts Arena's own ties to New York City. We're a Paris-based nonprofit in partnership with and housed in, where you are tonight, the Paris property of New York City's Columbia University, Columbia Global Centers Europe. Our first public event ever, early in 2008, was New Work from New York. Since then, we've regularly showcased New Yorkers in the arts and culture, among them Robert Gottlieb, legendary editor of The New Yorker, former New York Times photo critic Vicki Goldberg, Ellen Soren, director of the George Balanchine Trust and managing director of the New York Choreographic Institute of New York City Ballet, Robert Storr, now dean of the Yale School of Art but formerly senior curator at MoMA, Anne Poulet, director emerita of the Frick Collection, avant-garde theater artist Robert Wilson, Lucinda Childs, Mikhail Baryshnikov, Willem Dafoe, composer-singer Rufus Wainwright, the film director James Ivory, Richard Pena, director emeritus of the New York Film Festival and program director of the Lincoln Center Film Festival, Jonathan Hollander of Battery Dance, Baroque conductor William Christie, who moves between Paris and the Juilliard School in New York. And 2 weeks ago, the fourth annual Arts Arena Watermill performance brought New York-based Le Monde Dance Company principal Kristen Foote to Paris for a premiere. Today, the Arts Arena is incorporated in New York as the Arts Arena International, Inc., giving us a privileged presence in both of these extraordinary cities. Of course, beyond the Arts Arena, there's a legendary history of cultural exchange between French and American artists. Hemingway, Baldwin, Gertrude Stein, Josephine Baker found their center in Paris. Marcel Duchamp and Louise Bourgeois ultimately found theirs in New York. Benjamin Millepied danced with New York City Ballet before becoming director of the Paris Opera Ballet, where he initially trained. Jeff Koons' artwork was featured in Versailles, before being given a retrospective this year at the Centre Pompidou. There are other reasons still. Our two very different cities face some similar issues. Among them, how to reconcile historical preservation with expanding housing needs and economic diversity. What to do about cars and air pollution, flooding of urban rivers, decentralization of cultural institutions outside of the centre-ville, transportation matters that have faced New York's great institution, BAM, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and now face Paris's new Philharmonie de Paris, also somewhat off the beaten track. And at this time, both cities are faced with economic uncertainty and with questions of public and private financing. But the primary reason for the Arts Arena's pride in launching tonight the Arts Arena Municipal Art Society Paris-New York series on cities is that MAS is one of the most dynamic and effective nonprofit advocacy organizations I have ever encountered. MAS is a doer and a fighter. It gets things done. It provides all of us with an exceptional model of civic activism. We are both honored and deeply proud to partner with it. Tonight, when MAS's president and I met in New York last October, it took us approximately 20 seconds to decide whom we wanted as the inaugural speaker to launch our series on cities. Thomas Waltz is a member of the MAS board and an award-winning landscape architect working globally in urban as well as non-urban environments. Named Design Innovator of the Year by the Wall Street Journal magazine, he has also been invested into the American Society of Landscape Architects Council of Fellows, among the highest honors in the profession. The international body of work he has forged is known for integrating the beauty and function of built form and craftsmanship with an understanding of complex biological systems and restoration ecology. His work has yielded hundreds of acres of reconstructed wetlands, reforested land, native meadows, and flourishing wildlife habitat, and created models of biodiversity and sustainable agriculture. As Architectural Digest wrote, I quote, "Designer Thomas Waltz is changing the landscape of green space design." Landscape architects often fall somewhere between, this is a quote, architect, urban planner, and outdoor decorator, Thomas Waltz has said. But he sees himself more as a storyteller who embraces the complexity of modern life while seeking meaning and narrative in both natural and man-made environments. I quote him, "I'm always looking for the story of a site, seeking the specific climate, soil, indigenous flora and fauna of each location, its ancestral use, and archaeology." He likes to quote environmental activist and poet Wendell Berry, quote, "If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are." Thomas Waltz grew up on a 500-acre working farm at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina, giving him a visceral appreciation of the land. But his formal interest in landscape design developed years later when he moved to Venice to work for the Italian architect Giorgio Bellavitis and learned, quote again, that it doesn't necessarily take plants to make a landscape. After Venice came Paris. His definition of landscape expanded to a, quote, spatial language of abstraction, placemaking, and memory. Today, he is the sole owner of the firm Nelson Bird Waltz, with offices in New York, Charlottesville, and San Francisco. Committed to education and conservation, the firm has been involved in botanic gardens, zoos, public parks, private gardens and estates, academic institutions, corporate campuses, and town planning. A monograph of its work, Garden, Park, Community, Farm, was published by Princeton Architectural Press, and the firm has been the recipient of over 80 national and regional awards. Currently, it is involved in some of the most exciting projects in the world, from New Zealand's Orongo Station to what will eventually be the largest real estate project in American history, Hudson Yards in Manhattan, where Thomas Waltz is responsible for a 6.5-acre park atop a $750 million deck constructed over active train tracks. Have to do it, right? He likes to point to the middle of the site where the public square, a plaza of his design, will be built, and describe it as the city's living room. You will shortly see why. Woven Terrain, Expanding Boundaries in 21st Century Landscape Architecture is the title of Thomas Waltz's talk tonight. I quote again, "Landscape architecture," he has written, "is uniquely adapted to coordinate complex engineering tasks, restore broken ecological systems, and build the cultural narrative of a place. It spans from the pragmatic aspects of a construction site to the poetic aspects of how our civilization defines nature in our time." It is the Arts Arena's great honor to launch tonight our joint Paris-New York series on cities, and my great pleasure to present to you an exceptional, inspired, and inspiring landscape architect who has lived in both of those great cities, Thomas Waltz.
Thank you. Thank you, Marjorie. What a beautiful introduction. And thank you all for coming. I hope my funeral is that nice. At least I got to be here tonight. I probably won't be at the funeral, but I'm most grateful for such a lovely and generous introduction. It is truly an honor to be the inaugural speaker for Municipal Arts Society and Arts Arena, two organizations that have extraordinary convening power and share so many values toward a mission. I'm going to speak tonight through the lens of landscape architecture. Really, that is how I've come to view the world. I think it is one of the most misunderstood professions. I know it perhaps seems ironic for two organizations committed to urban well-being, urban health, and resilience to have a landscape architect as the speaker. But I hope I can weave tonight into the relevant issues facing our cities, facing the ecologies of our cities, and the ecologies of our own bodies. Landscape architecture is a bizarre profession in that no one really knows what it is. Is it jardinage? Is it architecte paysage, paysagiste, shapers of the earth? No one really knows, so it's up to me to build the lens and describe the lens through which we will discuss projects tonight. I'm going to show you 4 projects that follow the format of our book. It's called Garden, Park, Community, Farm for a reason. We have really pushed to expand that definition of landscape architecture to include agriculture, biodiversity, urban planning, that's community, public parks, but we've never forgotten the garden. The garden is where, in almost every faith, there is a story of origins in a garden. This is where I grew up, the view where I grew up that only one person in the room has seen, I think. But it is a place of stories. Believe it or not, the Blue Ridge Mountains are the oldest mountain range on the planet. And this alone is a glimpse into the way that our firm sees the world. I know for someone in a country as old as France, to hear that the Alps aren't the oldest mountain range can be painful. But the Blue Ridge is one of the biodiversity hotspots of the planet. It's also a place that has a culture of Western settlement from the 1600s. And I'm lucky to have been on the same piece of land for 9, maybe 10 generations now. So this idea of a piece of land being something you care for generation from generation is intrinsic in my childhood. Very strange first slide, I understand, but it is important. This is a slide showing the percentages of non-government land. Hang on for the ride. I swear this won't be as crazy as it might seem right now. But the states in red are 81 to 100% privately owned. So if you start to think about what are our solutions of conservation for wildlife, biodiversity, open space, and agriculture, we are in a moment of crisis. Another crisis that, Roger, I'm going to ask you to keep up with me. Another crisis that we're having is that of biodiversity. When I graduated from graduate school almost 20 years ago, all of the news was about how agriculture in the United States was the largest contributor of non-point source pollution in the nation. How we were feeding ourselves was killing our ecology, therefore killing ourselves. Having just graduated, I thought, do I have any tools from landscape architecture, grading, drainage, horticulture, geology, soil science, cultural history? Are there tools in this toolkit that could be applied to sustainable agriculture, to transform agriculture? And the answer was yes. We began a studio that we call the Conservation Agriculture Studio, and the last project I'll introduce is actually a landscape architecture designing very large-scale farmland. So our process for urban sites and rural sites now begins with inviting conservation biologists, wildlife biologists, to do a summary of the biodiversity of the property. From that data, we begin to build the design process. Parallel to the scientific research, we also do cultural research. Our species has left traces on American soil for 12,000 to 15,000 years. The traces are there. It is a new country, but the patterns of settlement, the arts and culture of the Native Americans is something, as a Western settler myself, that we have been woefully inadequate in celebrating. These people are young scientists that we bring onto these different properties that quantify the data of the horticultural, biological health of the property. I'll just keep going. You can do another one. So we collect turtles, collect birds, measure things so that we understand this baseline. Next. This is collecting moths by night. We just finished one of these. I was for 5 days with 20 scientists on a property that we've been working on for 18 years, collecting this data. These are catching bats in mist nets. You count them, measure them. Next slide. See the health of the bat. One of our most endangered species, because they're so susceptible to so many pesticides. Because the insects are poisoned, the bats then die from eating the insects at night. Next. So the first project I'm going to show you is a garden, but it's a garden that occupies what we call a brownfield site. I don't know what the term would be in French, but it's a post-industrial site. Des sites pollués peut-être par les manières industrielles, les processus industriels. This is a vineyard. We had been working on the farm for 2 years, working on this vineyard. Next. Working with the winemaker and the property owner to make the most sustainable vineyard possible. At a certain moment, they said, we have a new project, and we want to do a tasting room where we can serve the wine that tells our story. You can see how they plant grass in between the grapes. In most American wineries, it's bare soil because of herbicides. They also have a market garden that grows vegetables that they then conserve and sell as well. The winery is called Medlock Ames. It's in Sonoma County, California. So they bought this, a gas station. There had been tanks of petrol and oil underground. It was all asphalt. It was really not a particularly healthy place. And I said, what's the commission? What do you want us to do? And they said, make our values visible. You know who we are. I've been working with them for 2 years. They said, you know we care about biodynamics, organics, the health of the body and the health of the planet. Find a way to take this place that is a brownfield site, toxique, and le transformer dans jardin pour montrer our values. So so this is where the wine tasting is. The windows go from the ground to the ceiling. You have indoor, outdoor, and you're looking out to grapes in the distance. Next. Very simple materials. This is not an expensive project made of concrete. There was an old shed we tore down and made the barrière from the old wood. The raised beds showcase the herbs and vegetables that they pair with the tastings for their wine. And then you can see the profound growth that California offers. Next. This is the son of the winemaker, and I love how much his hair looks just like the... And here you see the water conveyance. The water falls across the site, it moves in these channels, and all the water is held in this garden in big tanks below. And you see the olive trees that are active cultivating olives. And then in the distance, a table. So I lived in Venice for 5 years, and I often went to Rome. And next slide, Roger. We designed this table, believe it or not, this is embarrassing, but based on Cardinal Gambaraya's beautiful marble table at the Villa Lante, but it's the sort of hillbilly version, the country version, where we made a trough out of steel to fill with ice so you could have white wine tastings in the middle of the table here. And then an outdoor fireplace, and there you have the trough of wine. Poor Cardinal Gambaraya, he would be very, very upset with me. And then pizza, all made with the vegetables from this garden. So this is an unused, toxic site, reimagined as a healthy, productive garden, but it's a place of telling the story of the values of the people who make the wine here. Next slide. So from garden, we'll go to a park. This is also a derelict site. It's an urban site in St. Louis, Missouri. We're moving from California on the west to the Midwest, to the East Coast, and then we'll end in New Zealand. So 3 projects to go. This was the site for the city garden, and this is a project led by my former business partner, Warren Bird, who founded our firm, Nelson Bird Woltz, and was my teacher 20 years ago in graduate school. The site was reduced to 2 squares of grass and a lot of cigarette butts. It was not a very healthy place in the city, but you can see a powerful place. This is the Mississippi River, the St. Louis Arch, the Capitol building, and this wonderful enfilade, sauf les tragédies des années 70. On ne sait pas comment ça arrive, c'est assez bizarre. And this is the project once completed. So we transformed this this lot into a public park. There are no gates or fences, and it hosts 24 masterpieces of contemporary art, an extraordinary collection of art, public art, collected by the Gateway Foundation. And it was the vision of the Gateway Foundation that it would be open day and night, and all of the art must be touched. He wanted the public to have contact, really wanted to bring art into the lives of people. And so with that, we also brought stories of stewardship, the history of St. Louis. This is not, as Marjorie said, this is not the decoration of the outdoors. This is deep storytelling. So I'll walk you through our process of designing this park. I still wish we could get rid of that, but... So this is what we began with, 2 city blocks. It's 3 acres. Next, Roger. Then we looked at the patterns of the Mississippi River. These are soil deposits year by year when the Mississippi floods and how they distribute soil along the valley of the Mississippi. I've said before, I'm not really the tattoo type, but if I were to get a tattoo, it would be all of that, from like right here all the way here. Someday. But you see the form, the curvilinear form. There's a vocabulary here that evokes the river. And then there's the stone that St. Louis was located on a high bluff over the Mississippi River for prospect, safety, and the ability to construct a port. So this is the first sketch that Warren did, outlining what the park might be. An upland that evokes these high bluffs, an arcing wall of the limestone quarried from very close to the site, a central floodplain that would process all the stormwater, save the water, and then pump it back through for irrigation. And then the lower part that would be this ambling walk that would evoke the Mississippi River. So there's no recreation, but there's evocation of the history of the city and of place. So it starts to refine itself. You can see un grand bassin, un café, les sculptures sont partout, et ensuite il y a un banc long, 1 kilomètre, avec des jardins dessous. Et chaque saison est représentée par l'hiver, printemps, été et l'automne. So here the drawing is getting more refined. You can see a spray garden for children, the flower gardens at the southern part of the park. Each of these evergreen hedges represents one of the walls of the original market buildings. The river is represented by this walk, and the cliffs by this high wall. So this is just when the park opened. It was all built within 1 year, designed in 1 year, and then built in 1 year. So a 2-year project. So you can see the market gardens, the evergreen hedges, the sinuous wall, the sculptures, the cafe, and the Great Wall. Next. So this is Amito High, and we did not have the benefit of working with each artist. The collection was already put together. So we had dialogue with the art. We had conversations with the art, the whole staff of the firm that worked on this. These pieces became our friends. So this is the mandate to Warren, again, my partner who led this project, and the team. Everything must be in contact with people. Next. This is the bassin, you see the Mayol, the Bagneuse. Next. The Venet, you can see the limestone wall, an interpretation of the actual limestone of St. Louis. An Opie, a piece located on the sidewalk with traffic lights, so it really participates in the life of the city. This Nick Dine, Big Hands, that changes every season thanks to the planting. Next. A herring with the bunnies located dans les champs, où ils mangent tous les fleurs. Il y avait vraiment un actuel problème avec des lapins qui sont arrivés. Il n'y avait pas de jardin avant, et tout d'un coup, il y a des lapins partout qui ont détruit la moitié des plants. Alors, charmant, plus charmant en sculpture qu'en vrai en cette occasion. Et voilà, la petite avec sa glace. Next. This is a Ricky piece, and we located this in the meadow of stormwater management. So as the wind moves the piece, it moves the grasses, and these are native grasses to the prairie of Missouri. Next. And you see in fall, this is stormwater management. It's the thing that you usually hide or you put in pipes, you try to get away fast. Instead, in an era where water is going to become the center of so many important discourses worldwide, starting to celebrate water, be aware of water, preserve water, I think is going to be an interesting thing as we move forward. So this was a very tranquil bronze sculpture that Warren designed a pool that the sculpture would sit in. In dialogue with the client, our team said, there could be an instance where a child puts their hand in the fountain or falls in. It's only this deep, so it's very shallow. But there could be one day where a child could find its way into the water. So we should clean that water to protect them, just in case. This is opening day. These children knew how to use this garden day one. Next. And this is looking down the wall with its polished granite surface. Perhaps to someone it evokes the meander of the Mississippi River. Perhaps it connects someone to the city where they live. That is our hope. So the next project, next to last, is Hudson Yards. As Marjorie said, this is the largest development in the history of the United States. That caught my attention when they called to see if we would submit credentials. They did a wonderful thing, which was an invited, it's not really a concours. Ils ont payé chaque paysagiste à travailler pendant un mois pour préparer un projet. Et à la fin du mois, ils ont choisi quelqu'un, et c'était nous, par hasard. And so the project is located here. This is a model of this enormous project. It's over the active rail yards of Pennsylvania Station on the west side of Manhattan. This is the Hudson River. I live right there. You see the Empire State Building, and this is all the proposed new development. This is under construction actuellement. This was a project that was actually designed to cover the yards when Pennsylvania Station was built. So at the turn of the 20th century, in 1908, this was an idea about building a whole piece of city over the train yards. About 10 years ago, the city of New York, well, 2004, they made a bid for the Olympic Games that were to be in 2012. So they permitted all of this to be built as a stadium. New York did not win the Olympic bid, and so they decided to release the project to developers to put buildings over this entire site. I wake up a little bit frightened every morning about being responsible for this project. So we have an amazing team, however, of engineers, architects, planners, electricians, sustainable engineers. It's been an extraordinary dialogue. The first piece of the project that I'll show you is this. This is 28 acres of Manhattan at a totaling, I think it's 13 million square feet of space. But we began not with the trains. We began in 1609. What was the coast of Manhattan? There's a fantastic project that was done by Eric Sanderson and Markley Boyer called the Manhattan Project. And they mapped what New York would have been in the 17th century. The settlement patterns of the Native Americans, the horticulture, the streams and rivers, and you can see this is the western yards and that is the eastern yards. So in each slide, we've dropped the two, the rail yards. You can see this was the historic shoreline. So all of the western yards is built in the river. It's on fill. So this was never built on because this was a wet meadow, a marais. Vous avez une histoire de remplir des marais ici, je pense. And here you can see the amount of fill there. And by the 20th century, you start to have the very end of the site being built on. Next. There were three great innovations worldwide in civil engineering in the early 20th century. The Transcontinental Railroad was something America was very proud of. It connected from San Francisco to New Jersey, but not to New York, because the Hudson River was so wide and le rocher dessous, tellement profond, genre 150 mètres de profondeur de le rocher, il n'y avait rien auquel d'attacher, accrocher le tunnel. So it remained an obstacle. The other was the construction of the Suez Canal, an immense, immense construction project. And the third, historically recognized, is the Pennsylvania Railroad construction of the Hudson Yards Tunnel. It was, the engineer was named Cassatt, and he was the brother of Marie Cassatt, an Impressionist painter that, oh good, yes, thank you. And so he had this idea of welding together small, genre 50 cm, flanges of tunnel, welding them one by one as they dug their way through below the river, through mud. It's basically glacial silt that is flexible or plastic. So it hangs like a chain, like a catenary arc that is attached at the two ends, but for the full width of the river, it's hanging through mud. It's the tunnel that you're using today, if you go. But it works fine. Next. So this is the map, the section. You can see this is the granite, and that's the mud. That's the beginning and the end. This is the shaft. There were two great head shields making their way. I'm going to go backwards one. This would advance 50 cm. Ces portes s'ouvrent et on lève le buoy. Next. So we went to the museum of, connected with the Museum of Industry at Hagley that the DuPont family established, and discovered this photograph that was the inaugural day to dig the tunnel, day one. And right here, West 32nd Street and 11th Avenue. Next. There it is. That's in the middle of Hudson Yards. This is our site. This historic civil engineering event had been completely erased from memory, and it was the identity of this place. Next. So, oh, sorry about the bad slide. This was our concours that qu'a gagné. And we had an idea about celebrating this spot with an immense tower of stairs. So historically, people like to go up small things, maybe 5 or 6 stories, and look out and see the city. Merci, d'ailleurs. Merci beaucoup. Peut-être vous n'êtes pas assez remercié autant pour la Statue de la Liberté, mais moi, personnellement, je vous remercie de tout cœur. Son bras a été emporté aux États-Unis et mis à Madison Square pendant qu'elle arrive. But I love that as a precedent of a small tower for looking out. These are other interesting towers that we thought, let's commemorate the idea of this excavation. Next. So this was our concours with the idea of, like at the Château de Blois, de Léonard de Vinci, qui a fait le double hélix, l'escalier en hélix. We had this idea that you could do it at the gradient for handicapped mobility, and the two could go spiral all the way to the top and then all the way back down, and on se croise jamais. Next. So this was the one idea of the entire plan. Next. And this is over the shaft where the tunnel began. The owner of this project is Related Development Corporation. They decided they loved this idea, but they needed a very famous artist to do it. So they hired Thomas Heatherwick, who had done these remarkable, extraordinary projects, and ever since we've been in dialogue with him to design this object that I'm not allowed to show yet, but watch the news. Watch closely. It's going to be announced very soon. So this is the project as it's developed. This is where the object will go. These are the gardens that are north is pointing down. This is the culture shed. I'll tell you a little more about that. A cafe, a bosquet, and multiple different places or plazas in the city. So the form really began with this idea of a gravitational pull, how the landscape could be the center instead of a facade for each building. So this is the High Line Park making its way up and around. And now, Roger, next. So that's dropping in. You'll come from the High Line straight through into the plaza and on to the rest of the parks. This is the next part of the project that will hopefully we'll be hired next year to work on. Next. So this is an image that has been made to show what the view will be to the north. These are the North Gardens. Next, showcasing the native horticulture of New York. The view from the High Line into the park. The actual construction right now, we're up 30 stories. But when I say expanding the definition of landscape architecture, it starts with the landscape architecture is affecting or impacting all of this depth, from the tunnels to the tracks, the caissons that carry the structure, the utilities, the concrete. It's a sandwich, 7 or 8 feet thick, that carries all of this landscape over the active train lines. The trains continue during construction, so it's quite surprising. Next. And this is the culture shed at the height of the park. And I want to show you, this is the entrance coming up the North Gardens. There's a 200-foot-long cascade that comes down that evokes the way water moves over rocks along the Hudson River. Next. This is the culture shed. This is an 80-foot-tall concrete structure, qui roule. Next. So it's over a concert, and then you can put it away. You want to go backwards? So in inclement weather, le concert, is Juliette, no? And so that gets put away. So this is under construction. It's an extraordinary building called the Culture Shed, designed by Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro. So this is a view to the Culture Shed, the North Park. Next. We wanted an immersion in horticulture because the buildings will be, one of them will be the 4th tallest skyscraper in New York City. So these buildings are immense, and they're glass and steel. But our bodies need to be surrounded by plants. Our bodies need horticulture. We need to be next to something that can die. I know that sounds strange, but I think when you sense the impermanence de la nature à côté de soi, ça change un peu le point de vue émotionnel. So the last project is Orongo Station, and this is the one that most responds to these issues of biodiversity, wildlife, and agriculture. 3 things that are in crisis right now. And this is where I've said before, I feel like landscape is actually not optional anymore. The landscape is an urgent matter. So we began on this farm, hired by an American who had purchased this farm, and very excited. It's extremely beautiful, 3,000 acres of coastal New Zealand, and a very important historic site. It's the first piece of land sighted by Captain James Cook in the ship the Endeavour in 1769. But also, importantly, in 1300, it was the landing site of the first great migration of Maori warriors in the Horoto canoe that landed at this site. And this is the property. So I hear, which is lovely. However, there's a different to be heard. And that is when you understand that naturally, this was rainforest. Historically, this was one of the most biodiverse and rare sites on the planet. New Zealand evolved without mammals. New Zealand evolved without mammals. Cats, birds, tigers, rats, dogs, humans, nothing. So in 1300, the Maori brought the first dogs and rats, probably not by choice as much, but, well, the rat part, I love dogs. But. And then with the English settling, I mean, forget it. Everything came over. They were like, we need protein. So they brought livestock, cut the timber. The nation suffered dramatic losses. But remember, this is only like 1830, 1850, 1870. The great extinctions of New Zealand are recent. Our great-grandparents can remember some of the species that were alive. The kakapo is about to die, the last one on Earth. So this is an urgent matter. We have an extraordinary couple that are our clients. And they said, well, what should we do? When I said, oh, this is an ecological disaster, they said, well, what should we do? And I said, well, maybe we could make this property a model of biodiversity, wildlife conservation with sustainable agriculture. and let's honor the Maori culture that was there since 1300. Let's stop erasing this historic culture of the first people of New Zealand. So this was my first visit, 12 years. We've been under construction for 12 years on this property. We now are doing 6 other projects in New Zealand and their largest urban park in Auckland. So it's led to a lot of exciting projects, including the National Arboretum of New Zealand. So these were the logging practices. You notice the tracks are tout neuf, qui entre le forêt pluvieux. Forêt pluviale? Pluviale, merci. And this is what the forestry practices look like today. Just this week, landing yesterday in Paris, I received an email from the farm manager that there had been horrible flooding, and because an adjacent property had just done this, we have millions of trees that have washed up on the beaches, destroying the penguin habitats that we've been building for 12 years. This is an urgent matter. So, if you have erosion, that you've ever seen erosion, welcome to this. This is unprecedented erosion. You see almost no trees on the entire property. So we set about to change that. It began with scientists, an incredible team of New Zealand biologists, ornithologists, soil scientists, and wetland biologists who joined our team. Here is a major wetland. The wetlands had all been drained to the Pacific Ocean to maximize grazing land. All the trees cut, and the farm grazed very aggressively. So these are the trees we start with, and now Roger's going to work with me to show you the next. So each one of these is a little rod that supports the trees. So all of those are trees. These horizontal areas are where the sheep walk, and it makes a little flat spot which holds water. Without this assist from livestock, we would have failed. It's kind of extraordinary that the manipulation of this landscape by the sheep has been one of the secrets to the success of this project. Very interesting. So watch this tree. Keep going. Keep going. So, no, no back. So you see, this is all one of our plantings. So that is the length of the entire shoreline. Now, next. So we fenced this area with the hopes of succeeding to reintroduce one of the most endangered animals on the planet, the tuatara. Who has ever heard of a tuatara? There's no one under 12 in the room, but I think most kids know what a tuatara is. They're a giant lizard. They were down to, I believe, 65 in the planet. They were all taken into captivity and bred successfully, but there were no safe places to put them back in New Zealand. So we fenced this area to create a habitat. Next slide. That is the enemy. These are the mammals that eat the eggs of the tuatara. They also eat the eggs of the migratory birds that live dans une symbiose avec le tuatara. So the birds dig a burrow, they lay their eggs, the birds fledge for 3 years, the tuatara comes along, sees the hole, lays an egg, and it takes a year of gestation. So no wonder they're extinct. I mean, there's really, they're so menacé. So we built this fence. This is by a company called Excluder. The fence goes down into the ground and turns under the ground and comes forward a meter. These are the brave gentlemen installing the fence, you can see. Next. And that's where they were. So the fence crosses at the narrowest point. It's quite expensive. It crosses at the narrowest point, and the rats, weasels, possum, they can't get across. They all the way down. Next. So we laid out this fence, and now we get to the part. So there's science, culture, and art within landscape architecture. So I have to admit, we looked at Christo and running fence. So we call this our ecological Christo, or our eco-Christo. So, next. And these are the heroes of this project. These scientists monitor for the safety of these animals. We had to prove to the Department of Conservation for 12 years, 11 years, that we had returning pairs, families of seabirds that had not been seen on this site for 100 years. So this is the loving relationship between the sooty petrel, gray-faced petrel, fluttering shearwaters, and the tuatara. So our chief wildlife biologist, Steve Sawyer, had this idea to do outdoor speakers and a solar cell. There's no electricity out at the end of this peninsula. And play the songs, the screams of seabirds every night at 5 o'clock. So just around cocktail time, the birds are making their way and they hear some friends having a party. Next. That's Steve with sooty petrel. Next. And this is what's happening. This makes me very emotional to see that now thousands of birds are inhabiting this peninsula. The first gannet colony in New Zealand in 100 years is now well established. This was the ceremony with the Maori leaders from the Ngāti who were our partners in repatriating these tuatara. The tuatara are in these tubes. This was bringing them into the enclosure. They went into made tunnels into the dirt for them. We have 35 individuals, and there's one from our site enjoying for the first time its natural habitat once again. And I'm happy to announce 3 weeks ago we have our first clutch of eggs. So the ecology is established. The next piece of the project is the wetland reconstruction. This is a healthy wetland to the north of the farm. You can see the sinuosity. Our wetlands had all been drained. So we began a design that this would be a living painting. So in moment de dessèche, merci. I'm going to stick with English. That there would be a kind of river through the valley, so the animals would always have water. As the rains came and the water rose, the form of islands would change. So the islands were shaped, and as the water rose, some would disappear, but planted with emergent native species that could accommodate the change of water. So in the end, you see all the different islands, and here is all dry. This is the grading plan. These are the documents that it was built from. So the islands are very steep on this side and very shallow for foraging of birds, working very closely with ornithologists about what slopes, what sizes, what shapes do we need, and then we make it a work of art. Also inspired by Roberto Burle Marx, I have to admit, another great inspiration of natural form but abstract. Damage was done here a long time ago. These wetlands were destroyed. We wanted to be careful to not make them look natural, lest the lesson that damage could be done to nature and we have to rebuild it be forgotten. Does that make sense? You know, we didn't want to pretend it was all fine and it's natural. So we made this idea of a living painting. Next. And this is the result. So it provides the ecological services that the wildlife need. It provides the biodiversity that would have been there originally, but the form, in service to science, the form is still, hopefully, a work of art. Forgive me if that sounds arrogant, but we aspire for it to be a work of art. So here it is, high functioning. So agriculture is interwoven with biodiversity in a very healthy way. The farm is more profitable than ever before. The health of the sheep, the citrus is all on the rise. It is a very exciting story of this sustainable agriculture. All the agriculture, working with Kim Dodson, the estate manager, and my expansive team at Nelson Bird Waltz. We created a bridge here that focuses on one of the most sacred mountains to the Ngāti. So every time you cross that bridge, you're in homage to this sacred mountain. So even the day-to-day farm trucks understand that something important, this land has been important for a very long time. So following the curve of the river, by the way, all of the debris is left here now, and much of the planting damaged this week from these floods. So this is reorganizing the citrus production with high shelter belts, but again, as a work of art. Here they are. This is just planted, the trees here, and the bridge that our firm designed. This is the bridge in homage to Mount Taranaki. And this is it from helicopter. You can see the trees just starting to grow, and that's the ocean in the distance. Next, Roger. So we also were the architects of record for the house, the design architects. We had local architects of record, sorry, for each phase. But there was a historic villa. We made an addition and a guest house, and then gardens all the way around the house. So a canal, a swimming pool, a garden that remembers the early settlers, and we got the plants from the letters they wrote back to England saying, I miss this in my garden, or could you send this plant over? Or I've started incorporating these native New Zealand plants into my garden. So we call it the homestead garden. So that one tells that story. This is an homage to the powerful, powerful earth-mounding tradition of the Maori. So we met with Maori elders, we spoke with them about what we wanted to do and got their approval. It wasn't just taking their cultural history and playing with it. It was actually done very much in a process of respect. This is also a native bush garden. There was nothing here 10 years ago. We planted all of those trees. This is the entry to the bushwalk. Next. This is the canal with native ferns of New Zealand. Only in New Zealand do you get these 10-meter high ferns, and now they connect, so you swim under the ferns the full length. Outdoor dining spot. This we call the Endeavour Gardens. So Captain Cook landed on this site 1769 with Joseph Banks. Joseph Banks collected 80 species of plant on that voyage, on that stop. Our team went to the Royal Horticultural Society in London. We got the list of actual plants and then made this walk. All the perennials are the exact species that he collected. So we call it the Endeavour Garden, named for his ship. Next. Maori culture is finally being honored again. It's on the rise. 50 years ago, they eliminated it from school, from languages, eliminated the language from schools. Now it's being celebrated, being taught again. There are dual language schools, immersion schools. This is the food storage system of the Maori, these pits, these beautiful, perfect circular bowls where they would store their food in winter. So we took inspiration from that circle, from the lookout mounds and the housing mounds of the Pa sites, and made this meditation garden that you walk all the way around. This is the Endeavour Garden, coming to the meditation garden. Next. And this is looking out to a hill that was sculpted very much like this, almost like the Japanese tradition of borrowed scenery, of resonating with the distant view. And then this is the inside view. I like this one very much to end on because you see the earth mounds, the cultural history, the biodiversity, the reforestation of the hills, and agriculture, all as a composition, as if it were a Constable painting, in a way. So I end with this slide. This is the cemetery where I have 10 generations of family buried within 10 meters of each other. And I end with that because I do believe that we're in a crisis of public well-being as it relates to public space, to parks, to gardens, to the way we farm and the way we feed ourselves. And I think this connects very deeply to the mission of Arts Arena and to the Municipal Arts Society. But if I could leave you with one thing, it is to live wherever you are, however long you plan to stay there. Live as if you were going to be there for 10 generations. And if everyone did that, we would have changed the world. Thank you very much.
You can see why he was named Design Innovator of the Year and why we at the Arts Arena are so excited about this new series, Paris, New York, series on cities, where we're bringing architecture and landscape architecture and sustainable development into our other offerings of visual arts, music, dance, theater, etc. We have time for Thomas Waltz to take a few questions, and I'm sure that you have some. So,
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Is there enough water in the California project for that to sustain the vineyard? It's so arid in California. It's far enough north because they get sun rain.
Right. There is one of the things about some of those grasses, many of those grasses, is that they are native to California before irrigation existed. So we've depended upon extremely resilient plants. It is enough with the average rainfall of California. It collects enough water to sustain that garden, that site, not the entire vineyard. The entire vineyard has lakes throughout it that capture the water.
And so the question actually to follow that is the commitment that government or local government, because most of those projects that you're citing with permaculture and other kinds of renewable resources were privately funded.
Correct.
Whereas how can you then expand that so that it's more of an engagement, a commitment
Right.
on a more global level?
Right. So with all the collection of scientific data, one of the goals of our conservation agriculture studio is to take the data collected on private farms and share that with, in the United States we have extension agents that are in rural communities. Most all have a public agent that is an extension agent. Often the information of extension agencies, one, they're underfunded, and often the information is coming out of chemical companies, seed companies, and so if we can provide for free the scientific data collected on private land and give it to public institutions regionally, then they can benefit from that science, benefit from new seed mixes, from information on native plants, native meadows, pollinator species. And that very first slide of the United States with all the red states where there's very little, the future of biodiversity and conservation depends on private generosity. I really believe that. And our job is to be in dialogue with the private citizen and remind them of the potential to support public institutions, to share this data and knowledge publicly, and we're starting to see it make a difference. The farm Morongo Station is open twice a year to regional farmers who can come. Sometimes they'll have, I think, 200, 300 farmers who come to see the fencing, the livestock, the tree planting, and it's starting to have an impact. That project has been published a lot in New Zealand and is being set out as an example, as we hoped, to use private philanthropy to make a public example that could hopefully transform sustainable agriculture. Yes?
Good evening, my name is Alice. I'm a journalist and a filmmaker, and I also had the chance to work for, to animate debates about the Grand Paris and all this transformation here in Paris and also in other cities. First of all, thanks a lot for the work you are doing. It's great to discover all what you're doing. I would like to know, how do you, or when do you involve the population? Because is it before designing, or right after designing, you just tell them how you are going to work?
Evolve the population?
Yes, for example, involve, sorry.
Oh, involve. Oh,
How
yes.
do you involve the
Sorry, pardon.
C'est mon français, c'est mon anglais, désolé.
Hopefully c'est la même chose, on espère. Tonight I've shown you a selection of projects really connected to a public space, in the case of Hudson Yards, but then these other agendas of larger scale sustainability. The largest part of the work of the firm is actually public parks. And in those public processes, for example, in Houston, we're designing a park that is twice the size of Central Park. So it's enormous in downtown Houston. We have met with 3,300 Houstonians to involve them in a very public process of design. So when we have the opportunity for public process, we take advantage of that to include every community possible. In fact, we moved the public meetings for 2 years. Well, it was about 1 year and 2 months of information gathering and then probably 8 months of design. We moved the public meetings to different neighborhoods very far from the park so that we could get good attendance of neighborhoods that weren't adjacent to this park in the very center of the city. That process was one that began with mistrust, I would say, as many public processes. You're going to transform the largest park in the city. The park had suffered 6 years of drought and 90% of the forest trees were dead. So it was a disaster. But still, people said, don't mess up our park. And I'm sympathetic to that. So what we did was we started to discover what were the stories of the park. What was the history? What happened there? How long was it managed? And we discovered by doing soil borings, we found levels of cinder, of ash. So we knew that this had been a fire-managed prairie by the Karankawa Indians for up to 400 years. They had been managing this landscape. This was a highly altered landscape. And then settlers had come in. It had been a training camp for World War I soldiers before it became the park. So by connecting people to the story of their city and of their park, and even to the ecological history of Texas, they started to own the story. They started to get excited about what this park could become. So that's a process that is storytelling, as Marjorie said, but they're real stories. They're the very, very real stories of a place. And I believe that if you can connect an emotional, build an emotional bond between people and place, they will care for it. They will take care of it in a very different way. So those are really our goals with these projects. And one thing I have to mention, I am remiss in not saying at the very start, is that my office has a staff of 40 people doing these projects. I get to stand up and talk about them, but it is they who do all the hard work, the incredible creativity. We work really as a big family, and it's very exciting to have so many talented people. But these collaborations are not only with my design staff, they're with the craftspeople, the horticulturists, and the scientists that make all these projects come alive. So.
Do you understand why it took us, you probably wonder why it took us 20 seconds to come up with Thomas Waltz as our inaugural speaker. Thank you, Thomas. This was terrific. Our season ends here because the Arts Arena was founded by an academic and who still lives on academic calendars. And so this is the end until mid-September, when we will start up again with another full program. And I too would like to say that you see me up here, but the Arts Arena, we're working on 40. Right now we have 3.5 people. And I think you know most of them. Robert Knapp, who is our administrator and was doing the production today, Mary Scarvalone, who's doing operations management, Lisa Vanko, who's not here tonight, she's in California for events, and Roger, who does everything from bringing champagne, explaining it, to doing the videos, and I thank all of them enormously. I would also like to just give one other thank you. Some of you who were here earlier know that the Arts Arena received a magnificent large grant from the Danny Kaye and Sylvia Fine Kaye Foundation, and it was given under the most extraordinary terms, which was we had a month to match it, and if we did, it would be matched 2-to-1. We not only matched it, we exceeded it. And what really makes me excited is that all sorts of people participated, a lot of you here, and the donations range from €5 to $10,000, which I think says a lot. So I'm very thankful to all of you, and thank you for being with us over so many events this season.
One of the great similarities, it seems to me, between the Municipal Art Society and the Arts Arena is their power to convene thinkers, great thinkers, and then to make that discourse public. It seems very different from the academy or a university where it brings professors or thinkers together. Here, they're doing it, but it's a public forum, open to the public. And I think that's a really critical quality of these two organizations. And with the convening power that each has, by combining forces and showing lessons learned and challenges of both Paris and New York, I think we have a really exciting series ahead of us.